It's Sunday afternoon. Milo has nowhere to be, nothing due, no messages waiting for a reply. He sits down on the couch to just exist for an hour, and within 4 minutes, a voice in his head says, "You should really be doing something." Not urgent, not loud, just persistent, like background static that never fully turns off. If a quiet afternoon makes you feel more uneasy than relaxed, you already know exactly what this feels like. And it's not laziness sneaking up on you. It's something much more specific. Here's what nobody tells you about this feeling. It's not that these people don't know how to relax. It's that somewhere along the way, rest got reclassified in their brain as risk instead of recovery. And once you see how that happens, the guilt starts to make a lot more sense. Let's start with where rest sits in the nervous system. For most people, doing nothing should trigger something called the parasympathetic response, the body's rest and repair mode. Heart rate slows, muscles loosen, the mind wanders freely. But for chronic rest avoiders, stillness triggers the opposite. A subtle spike in cortisol, the stress hormone, the same one that shows up during actual danger. Their body isn't interpreting rest as safety. It's interpreting it as a warning sign that something important is being neglected. Psychologists often trace this back to something called conditional worth, a belief usually formed early, that value as a person is tied directly to output. Not who you are, but what you produce. In a lot of households, praise and attention showed up specifically after achievement. Good grades, finished chores, a job well done. Rest, on the other hand, rarely got acknowledged at all. Nobody claps for a kid lying on the floor staring at the ceiling. So over time, the brain quietly learns an equation. Producing equals worthy. Resting equals invisible, or worse, lazy. And that equation doesn't just disappear once someone becomes an adult. It just gets quieter and more automatic. But wait, there's a second layer that makes this even harder to shake. There's a concept in psychology called productivity as identity. Where being the hardworking one, the reliable one, or the one who always gets it done, becomes central to how someone sees themselves. And identities built entirely on doing are fragile in a very specific way. If your sense of self depends on constant output, then rest doesn't just feel unproductive. It feels like a small threat to who you are. Sitting still isn't neutral anymore. It's a pause in the very thing holding your identity together. Here's something that explains why the guilt shows up so fast, sometimes within minutes of actually stopping. Your brain is incredibly good at pattern prediction. If years of experience have taught it that stillness is usually followed by some kind of internal or external disapproval, a parent's disappointed look, a boss's raised eyebrow, even just your own self-criticism, it starts trying to prevent that discomfort before it happens. That's why the guilt often arrives before anything has actually gone wrong. Your brain isn't reacting to a real problem, it's reacting to a predicted one based on a pattern it learned a long time ago. There's also something researchers describe as the busyness, as virtue effect, an entire modern culture that quietly rewards exhaustion as a status symbol. Ask someone how they're doing, and "so busy" almost sounds like an accomplishment now. In an environment like that, rest doesn't just feel unproductive on a personal level. It feels slightly out of step with everyone else, like falling behind in a race nobody actually agreed to enter. Which means the guilt isn't purely internal. It's partly absorbed from a culture that has quietly redefined stillness as a small form of failure. Now here's a detail that might completely reframe how you see this pattern. People who struggle to rest without guilt are very often the most conscientious, reliable people in any room. This isn't a character flaw showing up. It's usually a strength that got pointed in an unsustainable direction. The same drive that makes someone dependable, thorough, and hard to disappoint is the exact drive that makes stopping feel unsafe. The problem was never the work ethic itself. It's that somewhere along the line, rest got filed under the same category as failure instead of maintenance. And that distinction actually matters more than it sounds. Because rest isn't the opposite of productivity, it's part of it. Cognitive research consistently shows that sustained performance requires recovery, the same way a muscle needs to rebuild after being used. The brain doesn't function on a straight line of constant output. It functions in cycles: effort, then recovery, effort, then recovery. Skipping the second half of that cycle doesn't make someone more productive long-term. It just quietly borrows energy from a future version of themselves who will eventually have to pay it back. usually through burnout, irritability, or a body that simply forces a stop. Nobody chose voluntarily. Here's the part worth saying clearly, because a lot of people carry this guilt in silence without ever naming it. Needing to rest isn't weakness, and wanting stillness isn't a character flaw hiding underneath a good work ethic. It's a basic biological requirement being treated like an indulgence, because somewhere along the way, worth got tangled up with output instead of simply existing. Sitting on a couch doing nothing isn't wasted time. It's the maintenance that makes everything else possible. The goal was never to stop caring about doing well. It's separating the doing from the deserving, learning that stillness doesn't need to be earned first. Because the version of you that gets to rest without guilt isn't lazier than the one constantly proving something. It's just finally safe enough to stop. If you've ever felt guilty for doing absolutely nothing, hit subscribe. And if you want to understand why some people avoid eye contact even when they have nothing to hide, that video is going to explain more than you expect. Click it.